You didn't laugh at all, and then she went, "Oh my God, that was so embarrassing."
Yeah,
All right, I reckon we might get started now, guys. Got everyone? You guys. So I'll just introduce myself first. My name is Eleanor. I'm part of the events team at Avid Reader. And I'd like to welcome you to the launch of Sarah Schmidt's new book, Blue Hour. Congratulations. So we're going to have a little salon first. So I'm going to introduce our three authors.
Yes,
They'll jump off and
yes, you just head straight through.
Emily and Sarah will jump into an in-conversation. So before we commence, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of this land, the Jagera and Turrbal people, and traditional owners of the lands from which people are zooming in on tonight as well. I also pay my respects to elders past and present and acknowledge we are on unceded land. Also some housekeeping, just like switch your phones to silent, and our bathrooms, because of the weather tonight, are just upstairs down the corridor. There is going to be a little signing after, and the books are able to purchase inside. And with the Zoom audience, any questions they can put into the chat feature. So my last job is I'm just going to introduce everybody. So to start with, we have Constance Allen, is an OB based writer who typically scribes about funky issues through a feminist lens. She has a Bachelor of Fine Arts, majoring in creative and professional writing from QUT, and is currently studying at the Faber Writing Academy at Allen & Unwin. Her work appears in publications like Urban List, We Are Explorers, and a smorgasbord of others. Constance is working on her first novel. Next, we have Amber Gwynn, is a senior officer in the public service and editor of the Journal of Australian Studies and a lecturer in the writing, editing and publishing program at UQ. She lives in Adelaide with her partner and two cats.
Understanding.
Martin Kropowski is a writer and researcher whose work has appeared in Tincture Journal and Crackle Anthology. She was selected for a place in the QWC Hachette Manuscript Development Program in 2018, awarded the UQP Writing Mentorship in 2020, and took our runner-up at Princeton's Literary Deathmatch in May this year. Martin has been granted a scholarship to study creative writing at the University of Queensland, where she is researching the role of narrative techniques in online conspiracy rhetoric. Tonight, Martin is reading from a short story that was published in Overland. Next, Sarah Schmidt. After completing a Bachelor of Arts and a Master of Arts and a Graduate Diploma of Information Management, Sarah currently works as a librarian in a public library. Her debut novel, See What I Have Done, was an international publishing sensation. Longlisted for the Women's Prize for Fiction in 2018 and the International Dublin Literary Award in 2019. In Australia, it won the ABIA Literary Fiction Award and the Mud Literary Award in 2018. Was shortlisted for the Indie Book Award for Debut Fiction in 2018, the Ned Kelly Award for Best First Crime Novel, the Stan Critics Award for Best First Novel. Never ends. The David Award for Debut Crime, and was longlisted for the ABIA Matt Rochelle Award for the New Writers in 2018. Blue Hour is her eagerly awaited second novel. Sarah lives in Naarm. And finally, Emily is our in-conversation partner tonight. Emily O'Grady is a writer from Brisbane. In 2018, her debut novel,
Eleanor, next time
won the Australian Vogels Literary Award and was shortlisted for the Ned Kelly Award for Best
audience
First
is
Fiction.
seeing.
Her work has appeared in The Angin, Kill Your Darlings, Big Issue Fiction Edition, and New Australian Fiction 2021. Her second novel will be published by Allen & Unwin in 2023. Welcome, everyone.
She's revved them all up.
No, we're good.
Okay. And the seats weren't put down properly, so when someone sits there, they drop
from
down.
the aforementioned novel that is a work in progress, and it requires no context, which is great. Before I attended, I thought university consisted of large lecture theatres led by professors in tweed jackets, a concept I developed from years of exposure to and consumption of American television. In reality, the theatres are halls, and the professors wear t-shirts and swear randomly when they feel they've lost the attention of the room. I sit near people I do not know. No one is writing with a pen and paper, and note-taking seems relatively uncommon. The woman diagonally across from me is scrolling through various social media feeds. She has styled messy hair. Her rapid replies in group chats feigns attentive note-taking. It's more difficult for the messy hairs to be vacant in tutorials. Tutorials are more intimate, exposing. Messy hairs rarely attend. Well, sometimes they do and contribute outrageous commentary, which appears to have been lifted from last-minute Googles. Often I find myself Googling my professors and tutors to determine whether or not they are equipped to be educating me. Most of them have Wikipedia pages, which I mark as a positive sign, despite the fact they could have written it themselves. Most have published work, anthologies, novels, plays. None are particularly wealthy, or at least appear it. They may have family money. I wonder if they want to teach me, or if there's a lack of government funding for their personal preferred projects. Thursdays are my favorite because I have Ian. He leads poetry. He never makes us read our work aloud and trust we have done it. Okay, so why do we love poetry? Why do we continue to read and write it? He asks after checking attendance in our fifth week. A man with rings across his fingers talks about its emotive quality, and a woman named Grace explains her connection to its momentum. Oh, Dad? Ian asks. I'm not sure I have much to add other than to agree with what's already been said, I say. Give it a try, he nods encouragingly. I pause. My throat is dry and I want to clear it before I speak again, but decide against it for fear that the people in my class will think I'm demanding their attention. Well, I'm not sure I love poetry, I say. And you're taking a poetry class, Ian says, amused. It's a compulsory unit, is all I respond. Ian leans against his desk at the front of the room that pretends to cheat that this is simply a conversation, not an analysis or an indication of how my marks will fall come assessment time. So if it weren't compulsory, you wouldn't select it, he asks, looking at me first, then to the rest of the class. Perhaps not, I say, staring only at him. Perhaps. You sound uncertain. Because I am. Ian pauses now, drawing me in it seems. I take my hand to rest on my cheek and chin, my fingers grazing my lips. Tell me, Bernadette, how do you understand poetry? How do you find it? My turn to pause, a graceful game of table tennis. I guess intimidating. He smiles, wide and warm. Intimidating? Yes. May I ask why? Well, I guess it walks the line of being free and being intentional. Like the words seem to slip out of the poet's fingers or mine, but rationally I know it's being scrutinized and their enjambment means something to them. And that capital letter on that new line was supposed to be there. But they don't rhyme mostly, or in the ones we read here, they don't. And the words are just there, so it looks free, or freer than prose at least. And I don't know if I can relinquish control over my writing to make it seem free because I know it's not. But that's probably a me problem, not a poetry problem. Ian pauses. It's his turn to serve. Odette, you begin a lot of your sentences with, I guess, yet the ideas seem firm. I guess that's fair. I smile and he laughs. We receive some pity laughs from my peers. Do you write poetry outside of the confines of this unit? Ian asks. Sometimes, I say. Good.
Just being especially lazy on a Friday. Hello. From the top of the street, where the orange church backs onto a school, and children cross the striped bitumen wearing tartan skirts and ribbon hats and lace-up shoes, the city skyline is visible on the horizon, the shapes cut out like a row of bottom teeth. Every day the horizon looks different. On a late summer's afternoon, skyscrapers blur in the rising heat. For weeks it rains and rains, heavy-bellied clouds tarnishing the glass and chrome. Sometimes, as the sun sinks out of view, the light is too bright, burning in halos behind and above the gaunt structures. I bring a hand to my eyes, shifting my gaze to the red and brown rooftops, the crisscrossing power lines that dip in and out of the cassia and crepe mantle, all the way to the bottom of the street. I turn it into a game, naming each plant as I follow the footpath down past the little roundabout where nobody gives way, down, all the way down to the stop sign at the intersection, the one that cuts at an odd angle where cars honk and stall and gather impatiently as someone attempts to turn. Here is a garden bed overrun with gazania, I say to myself. Here are 3 Frangipani trees, one white, one pink, one a feverish coral. I wonder who planted them all in a row. Here is a shrub of hibiscus, the blossoms as warm and tender as sunburnt skin. Here is a wire fence drooping beneath the weight of a passion fruit vine, Each golden orb is glossy and unblemished. Here is a strip between the footpath and the curb where cosmos flowers, lilac and magenta, quiver on long stalks, clumps of croton and oyster plants obscuring the stone border. Here is a thicket of rosemary, or is it lavender, and a geranium trailing leaves over the lip of a broken pot. Here is another fence, threaded with orange trumpet. In a patch of overgrowth always cold with shade, the variegated sword-like leaves of a snake plant straining for sunlight. In spite of the darkness, they are large and strong, obscenely, aggressively alive. I wrench one bladed leaf from the soil. It's as long as my arm, curiously fleshy, the base leaking sap that's blood-like in its stickiness. I've read that you can slice a chevron in the leaf, place it in some water, and watch fine white roots descend from its cut edge in only a matter of weeks. I like to grow things. I like to grow something from nothing. I'm sure there's a lesson in that somewhere, a metaphor, a paradigm, an aphorism. I like to grow things. So I cut the leaf, suspend it in a vase, and wait for the wound to yield new life.
Tiger moth. Janusz tucks his mouth into his elbow, makes the shape of the words with his lips. He recognizes the sound, insectile in the distance, pictures the plane on the runway, propellers whirling, ready to launch. He rolls his head so his cheek rests against his forearm, the open pages of his maths book a pillow beneath. He listens to the buzz accelerate harder, faster, into a roar, and now silence. A smile creeps across Janusz's face. His pencil hovers over the blank space next to 6 + 6, diverts to the margin instead. He scratches at the page, sketches the plane, its nose aiming directly upwards in that moment of suspension, a plane in silent stall. Outside, the plane buzzes again, thumps into a low turn, the pilot having made the loop with an engine vibrating loud and fast. Okay, Mr. Decker stretches from the front of the room, covers a yawn with a fist. When you're finished, you can go. Janusz sits straight in his chair, scribbles the final answer, 12, and for a moment, forgets Alexander has gone. He closes his book, screeches his chair under the desk, and jump turns to the desk behind him. But Alexander has gone to some town far away to live in a house with his family. Janusz searches the blue for the tiger moth. It has flown away. Maybe the plane will fly over Alexander's town. Maybe Alexander is right now standing at the bottom step of his new classroom, placing a hand over the sun and watching the plane animate the sky. Gases jostle for space in his stomach, and Janusz decides to go straight to Mrs. Stugas's today. Outside her hut, Mrs. Stugas begins another row of red stitches. She's saying something to Mrs. Bezina, perched beside her on a folding chair. In a crib by her knees, Mrs. Bezina's baby gurgles, blows bubbles all over itself. The women's needles click back and forth, transferring loops of cotton from one needle to the other. Janusz doesn't know what they're saying. He doesn't understand Latvian. The knitted blankets are almost finished, and Janusz thinks just in time. This morning, when he'd gone to fetch breakfast, he'd left footsteps in a layer of frost carpeting the grass. When the women finish these blankets, they'll hang them against the walls of the huts to keep out the cold, the same way Janusz's mother did last winter. Mrs. Stugas sights him. Ah, she says, placing her knitting on the seat and coming to stand. Janusz! She waves for him to follow her. Knack, knack! This is their daily ritual. Janusz follows her into the hut where she fetches her watering can. Janusz treks to the bathrooms, fills it with water, and returns to the row of spotted emu bush Mrs. Stugas is nurturing by the entrance. Afterwards, she hands him 2 apples, one for Janusz and one for Alexander. Janusz makes to hand an apple back to Mrs. Stugas. Now Alexander isn't here, but she shakes him away, fixes his collar and winks in a way that makes him blink away tears. He'll keep the apple for Thomas.
You're trying to kill me.
All right.
That was fun.
That was so thrilled to be speaking with the wonderful Sarah Schmidt about her second novel, Blue Hour. I was at the launch here of Sarah's first book, See What I Have Done, and I think I actually was one of the salon readers as well. And I have a very bad memory, but something that you said from that event stuck with me when it was like an audience question. They just asked what you were writing next, and then you said there was this image that you said, and I'm going to say no more unless if you want to do this spoiler, you can. But it was just so stuck in my brain, and it just sounded like such a good idea for a novel. And then you published this amazing novel, and of course that scene was in the book. So could you talk a little bit about how the novel started from that particular image and the inspiration behind it, and how it turned into this fantastic book?
Into these things. I can tell you. Okay. While I was writing See What I Have Done, I was kind of, my then partner and I were trying to have children, and I kept having a series of miscarriages, and so I was kind of having these ideas about, oh no, I don't know whether motherhood is something, what is motherhood? It's a lot. And how do I feel about this? And there were just questions that I had kind of bubbling away at the surface anyway. And I really needed to get this book written because I was going to try and get it published. And anyway, I have a lot of vivid dreams, and this one particular night I had a dream of a woman. Her name was Eleanor, and she, I could smell her. She was in a car. She was driving towards the Blue Mountains, and I could feel the way that her skin was kind of prickling. I could smell her. And I could feel her emotions. She was very sad and angry all at the same time. And it was very clear to me that there was something not quite right about what was happening. And she kept looking in the rearview mirror. And while she was driving towards these, massive mountains, I thought to myself, the next time I wanted to know what she was looking at. And so in the dream, I thought the next time she looks, I'm going to look as well. And so she looked, I looked, and in the back seat was a child. And I felt deeply upset when I saw this image. And so I kind of woke up and I thought, that's a fucking weird dream. And it's weird like all the other ones, but this one really felt something. And then at the same time, I thought, I feel strange in my body. When I looked down, I was having miscarriage at the time. And so that kind of just, I thought, why are these two things connected? What's my body trying to tell me, blah, blah, blah. And there was all this kind of stuff. So I just thought, I wrote down a dream, as one does. And that image just kind of stuck with me. And I continued writing, See What I've Done. And I kind of said to Eleanor, as soon as I'm busy with someone, as soon as I'm finished with her, I'll come to you. And that's kind of how it started. But I was always churning this thing over and trying to understand what those feelings meant. Where was she going? It's always good to kind of start with, what are they doing? Who are these people? And all that kind of stuff. But that's where it started. And then, 5 years later, it's
my ideas for books just came to me in dreams. Sounds much easier.
Well, what's easy?
That's true. So I'm interested in the process of you writing Blue House compared to See What I've Done, which of course is, you know, based on a historical event that's very well known. So you have a lot of, obviously you've done a lot of research. Did you feel like with this book you had more freedom, and was that the thing that you kind of found freeing, or was that to you know, engage in the process of writing in a completely different way?
Yeah, it was kind of terrifying. I didn't know what I never know what I'm doing ever. And you know, when I first started this, so I just started off with that image, and I thought, well, we'll try and understand who this woman is. And I thought naively, oh, you just make some shit up and then it all comes together, and it doesn't all the time. And I think it's so that was the first, well, I wouldn't say it's a setback, but it was a shock to me that that what, you know, that's kind of, I just didn't know what to do with this. And so I think the way that I kind of discovered it is once I realized, I asked myself two questions. Once I kind of started figuring out where is she going to, and then so the question was, what is she leaving from? So that was kind of the first thing. And as soon as I started trying to figure that out, I think a story started to develop. So I just knew she was in an unhappy marriage. Something was wrong that she was leaving. So I started from there, and then you kind of have to, I don't know, as that was happening, I imploded my life. I kind of ended my relationship. I stopped speaking to my mother, had a breakdown. All of this stuff was going on, and after a while, I just realized, like, oh no, this book, the book I thought I was going to write, it's now has presented itself as something deeply personal. I don't want to do this, but I needed to kind of get it off my chest. So it just became about this story between a mother and a daughter, and how you mother, and how, you know, through trauma and grief and all that kind of stuff. So it just, I didn't know how to write it until maybe 18 months ago. But I guess kept doing a lot of research about a whole bunch of things, because you bring in other characters. So yeah, it wasn't until that moment, like, oh, I know what I'm doing, and then it just seemed to come along quickly after that.
Interesting. That sort of leads on to, you know, talking about the themes of the book, which is about the challenges of motherhood and the complexities of motherhood in a certain era, and I think it's maybe not something I've seen rendered in such a complex way in fiction. And I think what the book captures so beautifully is, you know, how a woman can't be reduced to being either a good mother or a bad mother, which is a myth that is, you know, perpetually portrayed in the media. And of course, we have those parallels between Kitty and Eleanor, which are there's just something so magic about how it all comes together. So you think you can talk a little bit more about those ideas of motherhood, and were you trying to intentionally pushing back against, you know, stereotypes?
Yeah. So I should say so then at some stage I had my daughter, and I hated being pregnant. I hated it. I felt like public property. And people, I don't know, you face a whole bunch of things, but like one of the first things I kind of noticed is I tend to think women in particular are always told how to live anyway. But when you're pregnant, my experience at least was complete strangers will come up to you, they'll touch you, they'll tell you what you're doing is wrong. Should you be doing that? And so it started just, I started thinking about that kind of stuff, and that kind of having to live a hyper-controlled life. And in the meantime, and people say, oh, this is such a beautiful time. It's fucking not. Like, I hated it. And because I'd had these experiences of having miscarriages, I think you're kind of seen as something's defective about you. And so I kept thinking, I've got this massive responsibility to make sure my body doesn't reject yet another fetus. And, you know, and so I started having these kind of complicated feelings from there. At the same time, my mum, who has, you know, had a traumatic past, she was very excited that there was going to be a baby coming. And I think one thing that I kind of noticed when I was talking to my friends who had children was this idea of renewal, that you could potentially the mistakes or the things that you've done in the past, you can now rectify with the new child that's coming into your life. And I was so interested in that. And so I think, yeah, that really kind of set a tone and a mood for me. And then I thought, at some stage, I thought, okay, well, when my daughter was born, I had postnatal depression, and you would tell people, I don't really feel well. And they're like, it's normal. I'm like, okay. And they kind of try to downplay your feelings because they want you to keep reproducing. And I just thought, this is just so weird. I'm surely not the only one who has felt like this. And sure enough, like I would walk around where I was living at the time with my daughter strapped to me, and elderly women like in their 70s, they'd come up and they start, stroking the baby, and then they would just tell you things. Like on one day I was walking along, it's like 8 o'clock in the morning, it was raining, it's in Melbourne, and this woman came up, she started talking, and then just out of nowhere she touched me and she said, I remember the night I wanted to kill my son. And people just give you gifts like that, and it's hard to kind of take it, but the reason I say it's a gift is because people are willing to be open to you, and I think I felt this massive responsibility to kind of listen to her story. And then the way she ended it, she goes, she's 40 now. And off she went. And I went, oh my God. And so it was one of these things where I just thought, we don't talk about this in ways. And so I wanted to, one of the things, once I realized who Kitty was, she's a whole thing. I thought, oh, this is juicy. And so I wanted to write a book that I wouldn't say it's an anti-motherhood book, but it's a very dark book of motherhood, and it's very complex, and people are never one thing, and you can be a good mother one day, a bad mother the next, but ultimately what you're trying to be is just, I don't know, am I a good human for myself and the people around me? So I really wanted to kind of lean into that and explore it.
4-year-old man is deeply traumatized. His mother has no idea.
Quite possibly, because it kind of, you have all these kind of conversations and stuff. Like my mum, she was 19 when she had me. My dad was in the Navy, he was only 20 years old. So he would go off and she'd be left alone. And from a very young age, and probably not that you should be told this when you look like a small child, but she really struggled. And from a young age, I remember her telling me that she had had fantasies of killing me and she wanted to do it. And to stop herself, she'd lock me in the bathroom and walk away. And I've heard this story my entire life. And when I first heard it, I think my gut feeling was that I wanted to make her be okay and to hug her and, all that kind of stuff. I think I felt very protective of my mum, but also it was a weird thing. Like it was a strange thing to be told. And I think now in hindsight, she had no one else to say this to. Maybe you don't tell your child, but it just meant that I understood my mum in a very different kind of way. And so as I was growing up, I'd always had this kind of thing. And yeah, it's a really, I think motherhood opens you up to a whole bunch of things that you didn't know you could either withstand or accept into life. So I think mothers are so interesting.
I think that a very surface level reading of Kitty would maybe say not the best mother, but when you think about what she's been through and she's gone through her own really intense traumas, and then having a husband who suffers severe PTSD, that allowed me to have quite a lot of empathy for her, even though she was unpleasant and very bitter and very cruel to Eleanor at times. Did you find her to be like fun is the wrong word, but like a very satisfying character to write, just because she's so explosive and she's impulsive? Is that a kind of fun is a bad word to describe it, but just kind of meaty, I suppose.
She's so, I think the way that I kind of approached her, and I think it's like anything in life. So one of the things I was kind of interested in is like, you can meet people all the time, and as one does, and they present in a particular way, you go, what an ass or whatever, and then time go by, and then you find out this key piece of information about them, and it kind of makes that last interaction that you had with them go, oh my God, that makes so much sense. And so my own family, there's a lot of secrets in the family, and when I was growing up, there was a couple of key things that was revealed to me at different ages about my family, and it just, I don't think I could kind of understand it, but it made some people in my family and my mum, their behavior made sense to me. And so when I was doing Kitty, I'm like, I want her to be this one way, and she's so, she is impulsive, she's out of control. And so I would just kind of let her kind of do that. And every time I do, I'm like, no, but why did she do this? And so it was an exercise in making you, dear reader, feel empathy for her when she does some of the most awful things. And so I just let myself kind of do that, because I wanted, as the book goes along, we find out things about both her and Eleanor and why they might be doing certain things, and the same with their husbands, you know. So yeah, it was really fun to kind of just unravel a person and then try to always find their humanity at all costs. So,
and I think that if I was in that situation, if I was Kitty and I had very limited options and I had a partner with severe mental health issues, when that was, you know, a source of shame, I would be Kitty.
Yeah,
I feel like we're all Kitty.
we're all Kitty. I was Kitty at some stage. Like she's white, she's fun, but she's awful.
Yeah.
And writing her was traumatic. But I could see myself. I'm like, I would totally do that. Yes.
Yeah, you have no other option. And I think that. Well, do you think that if Kitty was, if you were to write her in the present day as a early 20s woman behaving the same way, do you think it would be do you think it's possible for that to be a sympathetic portrayal being raised today?
I've never thought about that. Well, what a good question. I don't know, because she's still. Because I've only ever thought about Kitty in the past and confined to those things. I feel like maybe she would be a sympathetic character, but actually not really, because I think there's still a bunch of stuff that we can't get away with. Whether we act in the expectations that we have inside. So I don't know. I think maybe a slightly more sympathetic. I would hope she'd get therapy. That would be a key thing to have, and I think maybe that would help her. But I think one of the things that I kind of liked about this book for myself was trying to be as open about particular feelings that I'd had. So I think in some ways my hope for Eleanor and Kitty in particular was, if only you had been encouraged to talk about what you were going through and all that stuff. So maybe there would be, but no, that's such a good question. I've never thought about it. I might have an answer, better answer for you later.
It's interesting.
What do you think? Do you think?
I think she would be. I don't think she would be, because I think she had excuses back then. Not that they're excuses, but I think she was so stifled, and she's just, to me, she just seems like an outrageous. I mean, she's not a cool lady, but like if she was around today, she would be like a cool lady, like just in charge of her life. But she didn't have that option to be a cool lady. So let's talk about Eleanor.
Okay.
Who, I was kind of surprised that you started with Eleanor, because to me, Kitty sort of just overpowers the whole novel, which I think makes sense when you think about Eleanor is the daughter of Kitty, who is inherited all this grief and trauma and spends her entire childhood loving her mother and trying to extract love from her mother that she never receives, and it's just heartbreaking. And then we see these parallels between Kitty and Eleanor as Eleanor grows up. And do you think, without spoiling anything, do you think it's inevitable that Eleanor's life turned out the way it did, knowing that she, has inherited all of these difficulties from both her father and her mother? Or do you think Eleanor could have made better decisions?
I feel like Eleanor is very much a product of her parents and the family. I wish I could tell you more. You have to read it because it's a fun spoiler. But the way that I kind of approach her, she is a very muted character in comparison to Kitty, and so I really struggled to try to make her interesting without being so. Because you don't want her to compete with Kitty, because then it's just too much. So that's like a decision that you make kind of thing. But I think for Eleanor, the way that I kind of always saw her was she felt maybe her role was to always try to make the family work in a particular way and make her parents happy. And I mean, I kind of draw from my own experiences where you can often become very attuned and very good at figuring out how your parents are feeling, I guess my mum, and trying to predict potential future behaviour. And it can be really tiring, but it can also make you, so I always saw Eleanor, and the only kind of correlation I guess with that is that kind of way that you can vacillate in a family and try to be all things to all people and never quite knowing who you are as yourself. And so later on, Eleanor, she just wants to make her mom happy, and she meets a man who's not good. It's not good. He's the worst. But her Kitty loves him. She thinks he's the son of a doctor. He's like all that kind of stuff. And there's a connection there with the families. And Eleanor, I just saw her, I'm like, what would make you get into situations where you feel it's not good for you? So one, dealing with coercive control, there's that. But ultimately I thought, I think if you so wanted your mother's love still, and you wanted that approval, I think you could not easily go along with something, but there is a part of you that kind of accepts, I'm going to do this because I want her to love me and to accept me, and it just doesn't work out. So I really did see her as that's her role in the family, just continually doing this, and it leads to terrible consequences. I think she still would have made those choices regardless. Yeah.
And I also think that she's so used to subduing volatile behaviour that she easily slips into that role early on as well, and she probably feels kind of like not comfortable, that's the wrong word, but she is able to, she's used to sort of being aware of her parents' emotions, and so she's had these senses early on as well. Yeah,
because her dad, again, he's surgeon level 2, he comes back, he's got a whole bunch of stuff going on. Her dad's quite absent, and so I think her dad, she had a different kind of relationship with her dad, still trying to make him happy and stuff. It's a very different way of doing it. And so I just think we have a character who doesn't truly know who they are, and I think when you're denied being able to know who you are, it's, growing, I was going to say growing pains. I don't want to downplay how people experience their life, but I just don't think she had a choice. There's no choice that she's a product of the family she comes from.
And with a mother like that, there wouldn't be no room for her to
no, absolutely
kind of
not.
I suppose.
No, Eleanor has a brother, and she has to kind of live up to the, I guess, how Kitty sees the brother. And so, yeah, I mean, you can never win once that kind of starts coming into play. So, yeah, she had no choice.
I do love the relationship between George and Eleanor, which it's one of the moments of sort of lightness and joy in the book when they bond over nature and birds together. Is it important for you to have Eleanor and George to have that connection that that Eleanor doesn't have with her mother, or even that George and Kitty don't have together?
Yeah, you can't just write. Well, maybe you can, but I didn't think it would be right to kind of just write this very dark book that just had never had life, because that's not how life is. And so when I was kind of structuring it, I wanted it to be like, so it's split into years, and I wanted it to kind of be like each year that I chose was little portraits of what was just happening in that moment. And so I wanted there to be, because George is kind of like a tragic figure, really. I'm like, not everyone's like, your life isn't always tragic, and so I did want to bring in those beautiful moments. And I kind of saw George as maybe the only thing that made him kind of happy was nature. So it was nature writing it, that's what makes me happy. But yeah, I really thought it was important to have those light moments, because there had to be a parent who was able to give Eleanor, in some ways, not a magical kind of childhood, or always magical, but there are moments where you have great relief and release to relax and be yourself and try to discover who you are, because as it goes on, Eleanor does come into herself, and the way that she does that is through nature and all that kind of stuff. So, yeah.
And I think George's, in the way that you've portrayed George's PTSD is really interesting as well. I feel like the easy way would perhaps for him to be violent or aggressive towards Kitty, but he turns his trauma completely inwards, which is then a really interesting parallel between him and Leon then. Was there a lot of research involved, sort of looking at the effects of PTSD, and was that also difficult to write?
Yeah,
in a way.
it was. I've known PTSD plays out differently for a lot of people. And it's never, I don't think it's always one thing. And I think sometimes, particularly when you're bringing in war, there is that trope of the violent man. And so when my daughter was born, we'd moved to just one of the suburbs of Melbourne, and I was so boring. I'm just like, oh, what am I going to do? There's lots of walking you can do. So I'd go off on these walks with my little baby, and I soon discovered that I actually lived, there was like around the corner, there was like this massive old hospital. I'm like, ooh, what's that? It turned out it was an old rehab hospital for returned soldiers in World War I. And it was also the asylum. And that was super interesting to me. So I started kind of researching that, and I came across some stories of men who eventually just like literally lived there their entire lives. And a lot of those stories were silence. It was all about silence and not being able to speak. And I felt George very much was that kind of man, desperate to communicate, didn't know how to, had a wife who wanted to know about what he was going through, but also couldn't bear to know about it. And so, which kind of parallels the way that she feels when this thing happens, that I can't do about happens, they just cannot communicate. So it's really important for me to kind of, what do you do then with that type of PTSD? And I realized he's just not there. He may as well, I was going to say he may as well be dead. That's how he feels. I may as well not be here. I should have died. I now have to live in this space. And so, yeah, that was important to me. And I would read these stories about these men who, when they would talk about it, no one wanted to hear it, because that's a reality that no one wants to know about. And so, yeah, I felt such tenderness to George. I also had in the last book an awful father figure. So this time I thought, let's have one nice man. So that was him.
And I think is George related? I said about George.
We can talk about
George makes you understand why he acts the way she does as well, because that would be immensely difficult to be in that situation, and especially the era that when it's set, when there's no mental health support, and the cure was just to send you away for a few months to hang about away from your normal life. So I think you just, both of those characters were very complex and sympathetic, and I could just understand why they were the way they were.
Yeah. I feel like George is this great disappointment in Kitty's life. When they meet, it's before he goes to war, she's living it up as a nurse, she's like 19, 20 years old, and they kind of, it's hot and steamy, but very chaste. And so she has these grand plans, like she's a nurse, and so I kind of always saw Kitty as seeing herself as like, I can fix anyone, and that's one of her problems. She thinks she can fix everything, and so George goes off, she moves on, and then he comes back into her life, and her instinct is to, I want to look after this person. She gets pregnant, he impregnates her, they have sex, what I'm trying to say. But what I really, and then so they have this baby together, and should they be together? Probably not, but the way that I saw their relationship was these two people trying to cling to the past that they had made for themselves. That's not what the present is, so they're in denial. And that constant trying to try to be better for each other, but you just couldn't. And so for Kitty with George, I always just kind of saw this push-pull the whole entire time. I want you, I can't stand you. And I think marriage is like that. And then when you really realize this man is not getting better, this is, I need to yeet out of here, you get pregnant again, and then you stay. And I think, you know, when I was living in McLeod, which is a fictionalized version of where this was, where I've set this place, I would just, because I work in a library, and so people just tell me things. And I would talk to older women all the time about, their husbands have died, and all of a sudden they've got this new lease on life. And I would just tell you openly about what it was like to be married to their husbands. And they would openly say to you, I couldn't stand him. I loved him though. And so I just wanted to bring that into their relationship and just kind of say, like, it's just nothing good happens in this book. There's a few nice
moments, but it's
but yeah, it's how families can be.
and there are some very shocking scenes and moments in the book that you don't skim over or allude to, which I feel like some writers might choose to do that just to sort of suggest it's something without actually writing the scene, which I just thought was so compelling. As I said, things are in my brain that will never leave my brain in this book, which is a good thing. And I feel like you didn't want to sort of ease that discomfort with the reader. And was that an intentional choice or something that just sort of happened quite naturally with your writing style?
I think it's partly my writing style. I like making people feel uncomfortable. I think it's good to be uncomfortable sometimes. I was feeling uncomfortable in my life, and sort of I kind of came at it a few ways. I thought, if I'm going to sit here for however many years it takes to write this, it has to be worth it for something. And if I want to connect with the reader, and if I want to try and figure out things for myself, I was in a lot of therapy at the time. Like I said, total breakdown. I kept thinking, if this is a book about being open and trying to confront the past and move on for it, you have to do it. And so it became a deliberate feeling that when certain things happen, they're going to happen. I want to convey that to a reader. I want you to feel that. And then I want you to maybe find some empathy. I want you to think about how things in your life, and even if you can't relate in any way, can you find empathy for these people, even though they're awful. And so as it just kind of went through, I had other things, other traumas kind of happened to me, and I guess that's where Leon kind of came into the picture. I had a moment where I was very strangled in my sleep by somebody, and that was just awful. But the only way that I could kind of get through that was actually writing it out of my system. And so I found after a while, the more I kind of used my own trauma to, I didn't think it would go in the book. I just thought, let's see if it fits. And obviously you can change things to fit the narrative. But the more I kind of allowed myself to be uncomfortable in things that I didn't even want to kind of talk about, the more I found the book opens up in different ways. And so, but then you have to be really careful, because I don't want the whole book to be a traumatic experience to read, even though it's sad. So it's really hard. But once I realised I'm going to be open, then the question was, well, how open am I going to be? How deep are we going to go down this path?
And there's, like, the more that I think about it, there's so many moments of lightness as well with Eleanor and George, and then with Kitty and Badger as well, who's the son of George and Kitty. This book is set in the past. Your first book is set in the past. Do you see yourself as a writer who will always, like, is historical fiction something you read a lot, that you're interested in, or is it just kind of a coincidence that both of these books are not set in the present day? I mean, obviously the first book is like, it'd be weird.
I mean, it would be. I don't particularly like historical fiction. Like, I'll read it, but it's not like, ooh, I don't. But I do love history, and the history can dictate the future. are now present. And so for that alone, I'm kind of interested in that, but it depends what story it is. I think though, if I was to be super honest, and particularly with this, I think for me, setting something in the past means there's distance from how I'm feeling about something at the time. It's easier to write it. So I'm totally cheating. But that's kind of why it's set in the past. The dream I had anyway, I knew it was the 70s. And so once you kind of figure out, like it only occurred to me this year that Eleanor was a boomer. I know. Because she's born in the 40s. But it never occurred to me. I'm like, oh, well, that's interesting. Anyway, that's beside the point. That's kind of, but I think that when you set something in the past, you can choose to bring in certain things, and then that can inform, like, you know, there's 2 wars, and there's Vietnam, and then there's World War II. In that, and you can kind of say, well, what kind of impact does that have? And not that I wanted it to be about those stories, but it definitely kind of brings into it. So, you know, yeah, the past was kind of weighing heavily. I also, as you were asking me the question about the lightness, I remembered something, and this is what it is. It's weird to say, but I definitely see this book as a love letter to my daughter, because when you're kind of working through things, and you know, I loved my daughter when she was born, but I didn't feel, everyone goes, oh, it's so beautiful, it's a great love. I'm like, I didn't feel it. I didn't feel it for weeks. I thought there was something wrong with me. But at the same time, I could start seeing the world very differently, and I could, the way that I found I feel like I was falling in love with my daughter was when I was just accepting that this is a world full of, it's brutal, but it's beautiful. And I want, I feel like when you have a child in mode, I feel like you want to not expose them to all that stuff, but it's just all part of it. And so the lightness of living hours, and then trying to explain, oh, also it's really fucked up. But to keep going through life, and you can have these connections in ways that you didn't know. So I don't know, did I just want it wrong? I think I did, but that kind of, that's where that lightness comes. And so again, having it in the past allowed me to be more honest.
And now, as you said that, I think that the way that Eleanor feels towards Amy, which is her own daughter, is so it's loving, and it's, you know, there's complexities there definitely, but it's, again, not spoiling anything, but the ending kind of few pages, there's so much love there, and it's really, kind of does feel like a love letter, I suppose.
Yeah, the ending, I always knew how it was going to end, but I never wanted to write it. I'm like, yeah. I will write it when I'm ready. And so there'd be moments, my publisher would say, where's your manuscript? Like, well, it's coming. It didn't, because I knew I had to kind of write these particular things. And so when it came time to write the ending, actually my therapist and I were doing some work about something, and she's like, what are you avoiding in life? I'm like, everything. We were talking about the book, and she said, just, yeah, I had to do some mental gymnastics. I was about to get something right. And so it came the day where I had to write. I'm like, okay, I'm just going to do it. And my daughter was with her dad at his house. I was alone for quite some time. I thought, this is the week I'm doing it. And I just let it all out. I thought I was speaking to my daughter, and I just kind of let it all come out, and I was sobbing and all that stuff. But it was, how it is, and that's kind of the only time I wrote it. I just let that come out. And obviously you change it because it's, you know, you have to end the book. So it's not that big. Yeah, I just kind of let that all come out. And it was so nice to do that. And like, I feel better. I feel better getting that off my chest, and I feel like that is an act of love, to tell your child what you really think of them in a nice way. But yeah, and how you feel about the world and what you think of yourself.
And there's also a scene midway through where Eleanor is in her head telling Kitty what she thinks. Is that sort of run on?
It was the same kind of thing, same kind of process. One hit, one take kind of thing to get it off my chest. Yeah, that was a fun time. So
I would like to be.
Yeah, because doing those types of scenes, it's tiring. It's so tiring. It takes a lot of emotional stuff to do it if you want to do it authentically. So yeah. I made a rule, you don't nail it in the first 1 to 2 times, get rid of it. It doesn't belong in the book.
And very emotional to read as
Yeah.
well, like hard to read. I think.
Mission
All the time. I have a question.
Yeah.
Okay. I just have. Okay.
Sarah, congratulations on this book.
Oh, thank you.
It just sounds like that's courage, which I really admire.
Mm.
In a writer, I mean, I think it's one of the best work that you stick your hand down in that much. Braveness, I love that. I'm really interested in who your influences might have been in your reading life. I mean, part of what I've been listening to your whole session, I mean, I kept thinking about the consciousness, just not about the darkness.
Yeah.
But are there writers who have influenced you or made you, look things in a particular way?
Yeah. I have to say, I've only ever read Wuthering Heights. I don't know the context, but I love that. There have been writers. I have to admit, ever since I was little, my mum and dad, I feel like I painted a picture of a very sad one. I also had despite all the thing, I had a very happy childhood. I tried to kind of get through it, but mum and dad, because I was so young, I think their whole thing was like, go over there and read 2 things. So mum used to steal library books for me. They couldn't afford it. They were like, struggling young people. And so, so my love of reading started there, but anything dark. And so there used to be a lot of fairy tales, that kind of good stuff. Anything with blood and guts in it, I was like, totally, one of the first stories I ever wrote. I was obsessed with Helen Keller. And also ghosts. And so I think the first story I wrote was only in grade 1 or something that was about Helen Keller. She was a ghost. And she just went around, there's like study murdery stuff going on. So I don't know, I think that kind of evolved. But the kind of writers that I love are those who don't shy away from the hard things and will just dig deeper and deep, and they don't, and they kind of go there. So actually, while I was preparing for this novel when I was writing it, some of the books that I kept coming back to, A Little Life, which I didn't want to emulate that book, but the thing I loved about that, I love that book, I never want to read it again, was, Hanya went there, but I found there was a certain magic in that book that I kept wanting to go. So the influence in that, I was thinking, how did she do that? Can I do that too? But like, there's this very special way of getting someone to go along with you. They need to trust you. So that was kind of one of the books for this book in particular that kind of inspired me. I kept coming back to Helen Garner's The Children's Bark as well. Because again, I don't know what's like Helen, like Best Friends. I don't know what's like all of Helen's books, but there's something about her earlier work as well where she does, she writes about her life. And so I kind of felt like, well, if Helen can do it, I can too. But I always like that kind of interplay between you're bringing in your own experiences, but it's not my life, but I'm bringing something truthful to the page as well. And so, I don't know. I could rattle them off, but there are 2 I was thinking of a lot when I was writing this book.
Yeah. I just wondered, this first book is based on a real historical figure.
Yeah.
And there's some anchoring to the truth there. Like, you make this stuff up, but you've got this kind of anchor narrative, you know what's right. So what was the process like for you having that sort of writing about this sort of historical figure to making everything up?
Yeah.
What was that? What did you think?
Some of the differences were, and I tend to, even though I see what I've done with based on, I didn't actually plot it out. Like, I knew there were, and I know that sounds weird, I knew that there were things, I was lucky, I had some scaffolding. I didn't want to write a true to life. I was more interested in exploring the family. And for me, that question was, if Lizzie did it, why would she? And the question that I had, what do you do when you run out of love? That was kind of the question that I had, The answer was loiter. That's kind of where I went with that. With this book, one of the questions was, if I had two lives that kind of mirrored each other, that had similar kind of things, how do you move on from the past? And so that was what I was interested in. So when I was thinking about, once I figured out my two characters, the world really is your oyster. And I use my dreams a lot. And so I'd get these images and I'd write them down. I'm like, okay, I want these. How does it fit? How do I get them to do these things? And so the story starts building from that way. And then when I realized it was about the past, then I'm like, oh, this is easy. I will just have similar things happen and try to change it a little bit. So it also really helped. Then I realized that just kept going on and on because the actual first draft of this is like 270,000 words. Incomplete. I kept going because I wanted to have 4 narrators, a big family saga, 2 books in one, and Nora was not allowed to. And so it had to be about the more interesting story was the mother-daughter relationship. And so once I kind of focused on that, it just became clear that everything has to be about them and serve that narrative. And it went that way. So I actually learned a lot writing this book. I don't think I know how to write books anymore because I'm starting another one. I'm like, I don't know what I'm doing. But it really did help crystallize. If you're going to do this, it has to be about that. And so the scaffolding came a different way for me. So,
I write memoir and personal essay.
yeah.
I'm just wondering, in your own family, is there any blowback from publishing a book like this?
Yes, there is. It's again, I recently had a profile in The Age, it's in Morning Herald. Do you get that on here? I don't know. I don't know how far papers go. On the internet. And I was speaking to the journalist about the runs of this book. It's completely fictionalized, but I do borrow heavily from things for dramatic effect. But obviously, if you're going to write about mother-daughter relationships, I had something to say about that. And it's interesting because when I was talking to the journalist, I said, look, these things happen. It's really good. I do love my mum. I have a lot of empathy for her. I understand. And then we just went on to talk about other things. But I was very wanting to tell her, this is not my mum. There are some similarities, but it's not my mum, but it's not my family. And there are other people in here, like I've got other people in here in the book that it's them, but it's not them. And so anyway, the article was published on the weekend, and I didn't think my mum would read it, and I didn't think I said anything bad about my mum at all. But my mum did read it, and she was very upset. And it was quite awful. And we had this, it went on for a couple of days, and I had to explain the book to her. And I think the one thing I kind of learned from that is that the way you treat other people's stories and what else, it is very important. And I didn't want to hurt her. And I'm sorry that she was hurt by just 2 things that I said, which was she was abused and you know, she had postpartum depression. There were the 2 things I said. And I think in that moment I realized, oh, you're still in your journey of coming to terms with your own feelings about that. And I'm just a little bit further ahead of you. And so I really felt for her, but I was also deeply hurt. And so I don't know whether anyone, like my dad reads my work. He's like, oh, I'm so proud of you. But I don't know if he takes that on in a way to think. So I don't know. I don't know if they'll read it. I don't want them to. Just because I don't want them to think it's them. But it kind of is. But it's not. I don't know. It's a weird thing.
That's probably all the questions we've got time for, unfortunately. I'm just really interested when you're talking about how you said it in the past.
Yeah.
You could create distance from like any events that you kind of represent in your own life or your real life feelings. And then you talked about having the week when your daughter was away to write the really hard stuff.
Yeah.
How do you manage disassociating from events that are inspired by real life feelings to then like jumping into life as writer to then human, to not let it inform you when it's so inspired by real life?
I really struggled. I really struggled. because this went on for years, writing this book, I just don't, I don't know if I could. I have to be honest, I don't know if I did it very successfully. I never let these characters go. When I take someone on, I put them in my body. It's a process. And because you can tap into it, because you do have to be a human and go off on that, but I kind of am always feeling and thinking about the book. So when I do have time to write, I find them and they're right there ready to go. When I was writing some big scenes like that, I couldn't be around anyone. So I made sure I wasn't, because I couldn't be coherent. And there were a few times, but there's a rape scene, you know, and that was, I just had to do that. I need to get it out of my system. When that happened, I just couldn't move for days and days and days afterwards. And yeah, it was really hard. And then it kind of felt like, and then I figured out, I can now tell myself, I'm Sarah, that's Eleanor, even though we had a similar experience. And I'm going to just leave you in the book. And so I just had to keep doing that. So it's a big form of self-care. I also made sure I got more therapy than I normally would. So like at one stage I had to see my therapist every single week and we would just talk about the book. Yeah, she would do that. So it's really difficult. And I don't think I successfully did it. So I always, I don't know if I'll ever write another book quite the same way again, because it was awful. It was awful to do it. But I didn't know any other way of doing it. So yeah. And then other times I'd write something and go, that was nothing. It was nothing. It felt nothing. I was engaged, but it didn't affect me in any way. So yeah, that's why I left certain scenes right to the end. And I gave myself a rule. If I can't nail it in 1 or 2 votes, I can't do it. Editing's different. I looked at that as a complete, that was a separate kind of thing. By that stage, the book was done. I wasn't connected to it. I still was connected to it, but that generating was over. And then I just was able to rewrite things like it was nothing. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Sarah. So interesting. Such a good book. Go and buy it. Go get it signed.
Let's do another round of applause for Sarah.
Thank you.
All right, so the book's for sale inside, guys, and we'll bring Sarah inside and we can do a little fighting.
Is that on?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Right, let me see.
It's really hard to certain things that
You never know that. You're so sweet. And there are a bunch of questions. Because it's, I mean, I've been on my
That's fine.
no, it's actually, oh my God, I don't know where